Welcome, everyone. If you can take your seats, and we will get started. This is a continuation of ITA Open Session Industry Advances, and we're going to be having two interactive sessions to complete the morning. One by Working Group 3, Contractual Practices, and one by Working Group 20, Urban Problems, Underground Solutions. Arnold Dix, animateur for Working Group 3, will lead this next discussion, and we're going to be addressing three topics. One is application of improved practices to global forms of contract. Another is results of worldwide questionnaire on contracting practices. And the third is ITA FIDIC joint efforts to enhance FIDIC management of subsurface risk, which was a topic of discussion earlier this morning. And once again, we encourage, there are three microphones. By all means, we want to hear what you have to say. And so feel free to comment on items you've heard and items that you should be hearing about, in your opinion. So I'll turn it over to Arnold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Contractual practices, how dull could this session be? What do you reckon? Well, the truth of it is it's not going to be dull at all, and that's because you're all now WG3's new best friends, and we're going to share with you the work that we've been doing and also ask you to assist us to understand the issues that are important to you so that we can address them too in our ongoing work. Now, see that the magic slide machine is working. As you can see, WG3 are extremely handsome, and this helps us in our work. It means that we get access to information which is not normally accessible. It means that we can zoom around the world, getting that information about failed projects, about conflict, about issues that maybe are not normally divulged. But actually, in truth and in fact, we have more than 17 member nations on our working group. We have more than 27 members who are regularly assisting us, and our work at ITA has provided we believe the first quantitative analysis of the performance of contracts. So let me explain more. So some of you may know we produced a checklist a few years back, and that was received well. And some of the things that we wanted to test was, well, how real is this checklist? So we sent a survey around the world to something like 6,000 people and got the results back. And we found some not so surprising, but for the first time quantified correlations. We found that skill, experience, teamwork and cooperation are critical for project success. We saw that fair risk allocation, effective defect resolution procedures and merit scoring system for bid evaluation was also key to the success of projects. So for the first time, not just what we felt over a glass of red wine, but actually from the numbers that we were able to harvest from around the world, we got a sense of what was really happening. And in the room with us now, Matthias, who was leading the FIDIC group, and other members of our team from the FIDIC group cooperation, are actually in the process of building the world's first, absolutely the world's first combined ITA FIDIC subsurface contract. And so years ago, when ITA was complaining that the contracts were unfair, we're now in the position where we are contributing to and writing what we believe will be fairer contracts, not just talking about it. So at the moment, that process is, I think, more than halfway through. We've got ongoing cooperation with FIDIC. We've got a special task group meeting together. They were here at our meetings at this assembly. The review process will be starting shortly, and we're expecting completion in a year or so. You know, two big organisations, I'll put the or so. So what's next? Now, this is where it's lucky that there are no lights and you don't know who's talking, and I can't see any of you. There are some subjects that we aren't quite sure how to deal with, and we're going to throw the floor open to any subject, but we don't know how to deal with unfairness and corruption. We're not quite sure about what it means to have fairer risk sharing and improving project outcomes. And we do think that there's a place for storytelling and sharing information between us all as professionals from around the world, so that the blood and guts and gore from the projects doesn't die with us as we fall off the perch, as inevitably happens as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the presentation from WG3, because what we want to do now is to talk with you about your experience, about what you want from contracts and the delivery of your projects, and we want to hear from you what you'd like to know from us about our findings as well. So our teams are actually in the audience. I suspect we comprise about a third of the audience. No, it's not like that. And seriously, this is although it's an open session, we're going to be full and frank with you. We'd like you to be full and frank with us as well. So, first question.
Okay, not so much a question, but more of a comment. You need to get more women on your committee, your working group. In fact, all of these working groups need to get more women on them.
Do I confess to being a cross-dresser now or later?
Whenever you want.
Okay, so that's one vote on each side. Yeah, no, it's a good point. And actually, on the legal side, there is a disproportionate amount of women involved on the law, and I'm surprised that we haven't got the female lawyers involved, particularly in this group.
Well, I don't want any lawyers involved, actually. Don't take it personally. What I want to ask you is maybe something a little different. My experience has been that very often the difficulty in sharing risk in the context of a problem comes to having a relatively weak owner. And I feel like we should be meeting with the owners here and talking about how to explain to them and to demonstrate to them that if they had a stronger engineering internal group, they would have less problems with contracts.
It's a really interesting observation that you make, and I think one of the observations we've made, and I'd like to call upon my group to comment on this, is that the weaker the client, the worse the contract. The more it appears that the weak clients go to the lawyers and say, push all of the risk onto those grubby contractors. We don't trust them. We just want to make sure they don't do something bad to us, which is a euphemism for actually we don't know what we're doing. Whereas in the sophisticated economies, for example, I think Switzerland stands out, you have very sophisticated contracting. Can I have somebody from the audience want to comment on this proposition? Anyone? Yeah? Matthias? Matthias is the chairman of the FIDIC working group and coincidentally from Switzerland.
Thank you. Nobody's perfect. I would like to take up what I've already said in the past workshop, in this open session. In order to have a good risk sharing, we need for the employers to do their homework. And one of the things we propose in our contractual framework with FIDIC, and this is agreed with FIDIC, is that the employer in his tender documents should supply, one, a geotechnical data report, which is factual and which will not be part of the contract, and two, a geotechnical baseline report, which is an interpretation by the employer based on the methodology he fancies for his project. So we feel that the employer should, before he goes to tender, have an idea not only of what the ground is like, but also on how he wants to excavate and support. So this is the basis, which means that we expect something more from most employers than what they're used to do up to now, and this will certainly lead to better risk sharing and to better contracts.
So, Matthias, those sentiments you've just expressed, they are now being captured in this new FIDIC ITA document?
Yes, they will be captured in a series of clauses. We'll take one of the existing FIDIC documents and we will twist and tweak as few clauses as possible that to make this document applicable to underground works and make it a good form of contract for underground works, because underground works are different from other works only in a very few things. One of which, of course, is geotechnics. It's ground. It's because you can't do a tunnel if you can't excavate it. You excavate it within the ground, so the ground is paramount to underground works, which is not the case for many other works. But apart from that, many other works are complicated works, and it's not because underground is complicated that it's different. It's different because we're within the ground. So the ground-related risks are the most important risks we've addressed and we will take care of in our document.
So, Matthias, this work that you're doing now, it's actually highly confidential because of the documents we're dealing with FIDIC. The people in the audience now have an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. Genuinely, ladies and gentlemen, this is your opportunity to potentially influence the world's first custom-built ITA FIDIC document for underground construction. If there's a point you want to make it now.
Good.
Well, okay.
Yeah, come up. But let me just say one thing. Some contractors are females.
Excuse me, can you declare whether you're male or female? Yeah, that's female. Okay.
Don't do that.
I owe you a question, Arnold.
You do.
Well, actually, I do really agree with what Matthias just said, but then there is the theoretical world and the real world, and in the real world, we have to deal every day or very often with projects in which what is steering the project is not what is technically reasonable, but is politics, is fundings, is going fast because we have to, for any other reason that is not technical, build our project. And what I would like to see in a document like this is not only that we say you have to do your homework, Mr. the owner, but what are the minimum things that you have to do, and what is a minimum in a real world? What is the minimum that has to be done, and what happens if you do not do it? Be very strong on that.
Well, this is a fantastic point that you make. Well, the first point you made was fantastic, and the second point that you made as well. The role of the technical truth now is becoming more important under these new contracts. Let's be very clear. This seems to be one of the themes. Now, Martin, you have a comment?
Can you hear me?
Mr. Music, we need another microphone.
The way it's going forward is that the documents that are being prepared will actually be a series of documents. And for those of that you know FIDIC, you have the general conditions, but you also have the particular conditions. But on top of that, we have a thing called contract data. And if you actually look what that means, it means that the employer has to do a lot of things before he even actually put it out to tender. So all that information that the employer has to do is going to be picked up in the procurement strategy. And so the next exercise we're doing at the moment is to actually split up what information has to go into the complete works, and then we're going to sort it, what's going to be done pre-contract, what's got to be done in the contract, and then what's going to be done during the contract. Because one of the issues in tunnelling, which is very important, which is not being picked up, is not just that the underground is geotechnically a problem, it's logistics. You can have the best ground in the world, but if you can't get to it, you can't do anything. It's not like on the surface, you just bring in another bulldozer. So all these sort of issues are related to the schedule, to the program, and it's these interaction between geology program, which eventually leads up how much it's going to cost. So all these issues that have got to be done upfront, pre-contract by the employer, we already have a list. We're actually editing that list, and hopefully in the next year we'll have a summarised list that we can actually present to you next year.
So the thrust of it is we're wanting to make it real. Get back to the engineering.
Exactly.
Matthias? No, you're good. Comment over here, male or female?
I'll let you decide based on my voice. Charles MacDonald from Australia. I don't normally sound quite like this, but
it's working for the audience, Charles. It's fine.
It's not just a bad Marlon Brando impression. The comment I was going to make is probably fallen a little bit behind the discussion, because it was when Priscilla made her initial point and then Arnold responded to that. So I could just take you back to that for a moment without wishing to disturb the flow of the discussion. But those comments about the owner's attitude to risk and the term weak owner, I think that's an unfortunate term, weak owner. I think the owners perhaps are ill-informed or not sufficiently educated. And what tends to have happened with a lot of owners in the public sector, in my experience, is that over the years, there's been a de-skilling of those organisations to the point where they just don't have the experience. And there's also the influence of treasuries in the public sector, particularly, who are completely obsessed with pushing the risk onto someone else with no real understanding of the whole engineering principle.
Yeah.
So that's one comment. The second comment, then I'll conclude, is that not only is it the responsibility of the owners, it's also the responsibility of the industry. And in my experience, what happens when clients come to the industry for market soundings and briefings and ask the industry, how would you like these contracts to be constructed and how should we allocate risk? The answer often is, well, however you would like to do it, sir, we're happy to comply with that, rather than standing up and being candid and actually explaining something which may not initially be palatable to the owner, but they need to hear the truth from the industry.
Charles makes a point that connects to a topic that I'm concerned about. In the U.S., there's a reasonably strong support for sharing risk, whether it's a geotechnical baseline report or some other mechanism in the contract to say you're responsible for this, I'm responsible for that, and we'll manage it to those objectives. What I'm finding is that as we get into the realm of private investment, public-private partnerships, we have financiers and teams of lawyers who are very good at bulletproofing a contract process that says 1 point of accountability, 1 point of responsibility for cost and program, and my concern is that it's going to drive us back to the 1970s. And we are the last continent on this globe to engage PPP or private finance, design, build, operate, maintain finance, whatever acronym you prefer. Really like to get input from other people to say, what are your experiences about how one manages risk when you're dealing with private investors and concessionaires?
Okay. We've got a some questions here. Can we? Yep.
Dorji Phonso from Dugrain Power Corporation, Bhutan, maybe a country many of you may not have heard. The document that you're preparing with FIDIC, I'd like to know whether it's going to be adapted for a unit rate contract, or would it also be designed for EPC contract? Because we have just finished a hydropower project with using the FIDIC Silver Book with some modifications for most of the underground works. We have had a lot of problems. We can give you feedback on this. And the contract document was prepared by a sophisticated, developed European country. So,
yeah, we don't like that country either. And Matthias is going to explain why and what we're doing.
We would, as a task group, but also as working group 3, we do not endorse EPC contracts for underground works. We do not endorse the Silver Book. We feel that an appropriate approach to underground contracts would be Yellow Book or Red Book, Yellow Book or Red Book approach. And the drafting we're doing is actually based on the Yellow Book. Why the Yellow Book rather than the Red? Because basically it is more liked by the industry. It allows for a shift of design responsibility to the contractor, which is interesting because it allows innovative solutions which the employer itself might not be able to provide. And also, we felt that if we can find a solution in a Yellow Book context, it would be easy to transpose these afterwards to Red Book context. Yellow Book context doesn't mean you have a lump sum, just a lump sum. It means you may have a lump sum, but it also allows for remeasurement, for unit prices, and a lot of set of things. And we will use these.
This is really important, the point that Matthias is making, because this is where we see our role at ITA is so important. We're going to try and help reshape the way those lawyers in that country, somewhere in Europe, think about subsurface construction. And we're actually quantifying the reasons for the views, like the views that Matthias just expressed. That's why we've gone out and surveyed 6,000 people and organisations, so we can say it's not just an opinion, we've got the facts to back this up.
Can I just add a statement to that before the next question? Before we actually decided to go along with FIDIC, we invited different people to make presentations. So we also looked at the SIA, we also looked at the NEC, the new engineering contract. We also looked at different forms of contract, not just the Yellow Books, but you've got PPP and all the rest of them. And one of the issues that came out of the working groups, plural, over the last 30 years is that we as ITA wanted to have the possibility that the contractor can put in an alternative proposal. So if you actually look at it from that standpoint of view, if you've got a silver book, you could put in a proposal, but the problem with the silver book is you can't do all the geotechnical investigation just by standing on the surface and signing a contract the next day.
Okay, over there.
There's one here too.
Hello, I represent an owner here in the United States, and I hope that we're a strong owner rather than a weak owner. But I guess I'd like to say that at these tunnel seminars, it'd be useful to have some sessions that are softer and more related to the owner. You know, I've taken it upon myself to go to Colorado School of Mines for the tunneling seminar and attended consultants' tunnel symposiums and find them very, very informational and educational. You know, here there's a lot of very technical sessions, and that's why we hire experienced consultants to help us with those technical issues. But it'd be nice to see a whole train for owners, and even for owners to meet with other owners to hear lessons learned. In my situation, you know, it may be one tunnel that we build. We're not building multiple tunnels. And so lessons learned, well, we may never be able to use those lessons on a future project. And we're going based on the experience of our consultants and, you know, international, but sometimes it's hard to get the information that we should have.
That's an excellent point, actually. A way to harvest, well, to bring the owners together so they can share. Because for us it's easy because we go project to project, whereas you're there as the owner. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm taking notes of everything we've been saying today, so this will get listed afterwards.
Okay, Friedrich Berg from Guatemala. I just want to go a little bit, come from my side, negotiating contracts, and I think there are two major concerns from my side, what I experienced. First of all, I think we have to distinguish between a public contract or contract with a public owner and a contract with a private owner. And in the real world, yeah, as somebody said before, normally it is like that we have a situation where we are able, yeah, to present a contract draft, or the owner comes up with a contract draft, and this is a completely different situation. Yeah, and I think you should take in concern, yeah, this situation. I think the United States it's a perfect country if they do risk sharing. Yeah, but normally I have my experience goes along with the Australian experience, yeah, that it's a shoveling of risks, yeah, to to your site, yeah, or to my site, yeah, and I have a hard time just to shovel it back, yeah, at least a little bit of that, yeah. And I think FIDIC contracts, as far as I have read drafts and all this is wonderful, yeah. But if I come up with that document with some owners, yeah, they just kick me out, yeah, and I never come back, yeah, and that's not the business, yeah. So I think in public-related contracts, it's easier to work a baseline of contract, yeah, where I can talk about, yeah. But with private owner, we are working basically 100% with private owners in the mining and in the tunneling industry. So we do have a hard time if somebody comes up with a really nasty and very unpleasant contract draft, yeah, which we have to take back to our office and just see, to our lawyers, and just see what we can make out of that, yeah. And that is, I think, that is a situation, a real world situation, which I experience very often. What I have to deal with, yeah, is just to have a basic, like a grid, yeah, of critical points, yeah, I do not have to miss, yeah, in the contract, whatever contract it is, yeah, and that's my experience, and that's the experience going from Colombia up to Mexico.
So do you think it would help if the ITA produced, for example, some briefing material to assist?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because that's also, yeah, my first probably. There's also a question. Yeah, we're big friends here. Yeah, but at one point, yeah, we might meet. Yeah, in a small conference room. Yeah, and we have to work out a contract. Yeah. So are we talking from the owner side, or are we talking from the contractor side, yeah.
So do you think it would help if when you went to visit one of these clients, you say, look, it's not my idea, but International Tunnelling Association, they say this. Have a read.
Probably yes, yeah. But the accessibility of these contracts and what it ever makes a contract, yeah, is very hard. As far as I know, yeah, I do not know one single owner, yeah. Because some of them are first, they do the first project or the second project. They do not have even an idea that FIDIC exists. Yeah, and so they come up with like fantasy contracts. Yeah, and it is really it is a hard job. Yeah, I passed complete weekends of 12 hours. Yeah, just trying to put this thing in a feasible form.
I'm really impressed we've got back to fantasy contracts again, actually. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think we'll take this on board. Another question? It's over there first. Yeah.
I'm Nicholas Kazilis from Greece and member of the EXCO. Definitely, your work will lead to a very good sort of documentation for the contracts. However, according to my experience, I've seen many cases, unfortunately, where a weak owner produced lots of troubles, despite the fact that the contractual documentation was very good.
Yeah.
So what I would have expected from your work is this issue to be clearly mentioned and give a sort of an instruction in quotations that in order to have good contracts, especially during the duration of the contract, both parties have got to be strong. So I would have expected in your documents the enhancement of owners, either with buying services or organizing themselves.
Yep, excellent point. Yep, we'll noted that.
Hello, I'm Alan Hodgkinson and a member of Working Group 3. In response to the last 3 questions and comments, and then recognizing that the ITA is a global organization with a global reach and an authority that transcends individual players in the market, I think the ITA, and this is not directed to our working group, but I think the executive committee, is that we have a responsibility to help educate owners And this thing of not having soft sessions. I mean, sessions that are accessible to non-technical specialists. I think this is a serious issue we should consider. And in the slide that Arnold presented, one of the points was collecting stories. This is not so we can just sit around and drink beer and swap stories. These stories, this was an idea presented, and the seed of this came from Randy actually. That the story is something that's accessible to someone when you talk to them. If you take a contractual checklist or a FIDIC document and you show this to an owner, they're going to hand it to their lawyers. They're not going to read it. They're not going to understand the grave and serious, multi-decade consequences of some of the clauses, very detailed things in a FIDIC document or a contract. And a story is something you can say, well, we shifted all the risk to a contractor, and we lost $1 billion, and it took 10 years longer. That they won't understand all the technical detail, but they'll understand the importance of getting it right. And these are very powerful messages. This is something we can do. I'd like to ask all of you to remember me, remember him, and if you do have stories, give me a card or an address. We're going to collect this stuff anonymously and sanitize it so that nobody can be blamed. But we'd like to collect a lot of this material, which could be an accessible publication that could be given to owners and could start them on this process of education. And I'm hoping, can we get the EXCO to recognize this and say, let's see if we can get more owners involved so that we talk to them, because we don't have many owners coming to here. We don't get to talk to them and learn a lot about their concerns. And I think just having the FaceTime together will start to build bridges to them and start that education process.
Thanks very much, Alan. I'll make one comment. For lawyers and bankers, talking tough is actually seen as a sign of seniority and success. So part of our challenge as well is to get the lawyers and the bankers understanding that we as a collective group of engineers and technicians, we're not making up stories. This is actually the reality of these projects. It's one of the challenges. We're not sure how we're going to address it, but we're on it. Yep.
Gianni Arrigoni, I have 2 points to make. One, taking on directly from Randall. A problem I've seen in the last 35 years has been the hands-off management a la Reagan Thatcher. And that's what most owners still tend to apply, fostered by their lawyers. They have not understood worldwide that the best projects are those where the owner is actively involved, rowing in the same boat. And I quote for that example of Madrid Metro, which through the sheer input of 4 engineers, very senior, but a very strong team and the support, did cost less than 1/3 of Jubilee Line and other mega projects of similar ilk. So my suggestion is the body of ITA, together with FIDIC, should go back to the principle of the fair engineer capital E and co-involve the owners in an education process of the owners themselves to understand what's the point.
I know Matthias wants to respond to this, because this was a big discussion in our working group, absolutely on a key subject.
Thank you for raising this point, Johnny. As a matter of fact, we feel that the engineer should take more responsibility than what he's supposed to do during the evolution of the applications of FIDIC contracts over the years. We feel that the engineer should be a strong party on the site. He's not a party to the contract, but the engineer usually is an owner's representative, although he is supposed to act impartially in certain situations. But this means that he has to take a stronger stand, he has to be more responsible, he has to be empowered more strongly, and this is part of what we're doing in the draft we're submitting.
Sorin Kalinescu is my name. I'm from Metro Bucharest.
Could you just a little closer?
Okay, it's okay. I strongly support the initiative of taking FIDIC as a base because most of the financing, international financing bodies are using FIDIC. So it's World Bank, European Bank, Asia Bank, and Japan Bank, and all. But this is almost for public works. And who believes that public works are simpler than private owned jobs is wrong, because in public works we have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, especially in Europe. And those guys do not have the basic knowledge about our real problems. So my suggestion is that you do, after setting up the FIDIC tunneling contract, to produce also, like FIDIC does, a comprehensive guideline, how to read those lines. Because for many bureaucratic, it's pure Chinese.
Your point is very well taken. One thing in clarification, we are not just endorsing the new FIDIC document. The FIDIC document will have limitations. For example, if there's not the technical expertise with the client that's necessary for a FIDIC document to operate, no. And we're also, we've also reviewed the Swiss set of documents, which we think are fantastic. We've looked at a whole range of documents. You're exactly on point. We're going to have guidelines, strengths and limitations in the description of the document. Thank you for your point. I think we've got time for one more question. This person looks familiar.
Yes, now that my gender is clarified, I have just a final...
Sorry, you clarified...
my gender.
Okay, right.
I have a last observation. I understood when Matthias was speaking that you are pointed out a preference for the yellow FIDIC book, and I fully understand why. However, I would just to point out that there still are many countries, and especially, for example, in Europe, there are countries where they are not Anglo-Saxon, where contracts that are more similar to the Red Book are still used. And what I would expect from your group to see is also to address this kind of contract that, in spite of what we prefer, still exist, and help us to develop them at the best possible way. Because otherwise, in this kind of contracts, what happens is that the contractor that is forced, for example, to the exercise of risk management will not play a fair game, because he doesn't see the need to do that.
Yeah.
What I do have in exchange, and it sees it as an exercise to deprive him of the possibility of putting claims. So please work on this form of contract too.
We will be, don't worry. It's not written off the list, it's just a question of timing and approach.
I had asked if anyone had a comment about the influence of triple P delivery on risk sharing, and we have someone with a comment.
It's in the same vein of the comment of the hands-off before. The Reagan-Thatcher attitude has spread to the funding and the construction of the projects. So everybody started speaking about project financing and then public-private partnership. Has anybody realized that now the stakeholders are paying 3 times as much what it should be paid, because all the players in the PPP, from the promoters, the insurance, the banker, the owner, whoever is doing the concession, want money and don't want to lose money. So that's the next consideration to be made about it. I was against it 25 years ago.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment for the previous comment about the role of the engineer? Many of the people in this audience, as Elida quite rightly said, are not all Anglo-Saxon. I am Anglo-Saxon, but I actually live in Asia. And one of the things that struck me personally is that in the Far East, we don't have this function of the engineer as frequently as you have in the Western Hemisphere. And I'd like someone to comment from the Asian countries, because there I've actually done a lot of research. We need to look at the other situation where you don't have the engineer, because that's influencing the people, the way they think, when they suddenly have to work with an engineer-based contract.
Excellent. That we must move on. I think we could be here literally through lunch and dinner debating these topics, which is excellent. But we're time constrained, and we do have a third session that is just as relevant. And this is going to be hosted by Working Group 20, and it's focusing on how underground solutions can address circumstances in dense urban centers. And I would welcome Wout Brouwer and his team to come up, and we can continue our discussions. Thank you very much for Working Group 3.
Okay. All set. Working Group 20 is a working group, Urban Problems, Underground Solutions, that has a focus that is slightly less technical than some of the other working groups, and that is focused in getting a message from the ITA members, also to non-ITA members, to owners, to decision makers. And to get that message out, what we did a couple of years ago was to write a first report giving an overview of what typical urban problems are and how the underground can be used to solve these problems. And in that report, we made a first attempt to give some considerations on the decision-making process and how to ensure that the underground solution is taken into account from the start to the end of a project, and the underground solution is actually realized. And we realized that that part of the report is rather weak, and we could continue with that. But at first we said, to show what the underground can bring, we need to have a portfolio of successful urban underground solutions, urban underground projects. And we started with that by adding an annex to the report, giving a few exemplary case studies that we collected, and where we could all agree that these were successful. And an annex like that, it's a rather fixed, stationary document. So we want to go to something that is a bit more interactive, a bit more of this time. And we started building a project-based database on the website, where basically any member of the general public can put in a project description, can showcase the projects that have been realized worldwide, and thereby build a large portfolio of successful urban underground projects. But when we started discussing in the working group about which project to add, beyond the small set of projects that we had previously agreed on, we got in a discussion about what is really a successful underground project. And if you take a simplistic view, a project that is, when constructed, is fit for purpose, it's built on time and on budget, and there were no major mishaps during the construction, yes, we can all agree that that is a success. But it need not even be that all these four criteria are met. And I want to highlight that with a small case study that we have discussed before in the working group, which comes from the city of The Hague in the Netherlands, where they realized that they had a huge traffic problem, a public infrastructure, public transport problem in the city center of The Hague, in one of the main shopping streets, in one of the main shopping districts. And basically the increase in transport capacity needed would mean a total gridlock at service in these shopping districts. And they came up with a rather nice concept, shown here, whereby the tram and the future light rail would be moved into a tunnel with an underground station, and the space above the station blocks could even be used for an underground parking. Very nice concept. Unfortunately, as happens in quite a lot of cases, the funds available to the municipality were not really sufficient to realize the project in its full scale, so some innovations were needed to make this a possibility. And as you can maybe imagine, then during construction of the most critical parts, disaster struck, the main building pit started leaking, was flooded, and the project was halted. And basically a blame game started between the owner, the contractor and the designer about whose risk this was. And during the first 2 years, the project was completely halted, and that main shopping area looked like this. And after 2 years, someone saw the light and said, well, let's restart the project, let's finish this first, and then get to litigation afterwards. But the end result was a project that was estimated as a 3-year construction with roughly 1 year disruption at service level, took 8 years, huge disruptions right in the city center, almost doubled the project cost, and got constant media attention in the sense that the local newspaper from day one, more or less, started running a daily cartoon about the project, about 2 fish in that project, commenting on city life. And here they comment on the tourist board slogan of the year. But all in all, there were 800 of these cartoons published. The project became synonymous with disaster in the Netherlands at the time. Eventually, after 8 years, the project was finished, and we have an underground tram station, underground light rail station, looking like this, which is highly successful. And basically, it's loved by the public. And within 2 years, the fact that this construction was so difficult, so disastrous, at least by the general public and by the media, was forgotten again, that when other major mishaps happened at other projects, people started referring to this project as a success within 2 years. So that led us to a point where we said, at least for the general public, fit for purpose might be the only real factor that is involved. But of course, for the owner, for the contractor, for the designer, and for the insurer, this will remain a disaster for life. So it is what actor you ask in this process, whether a project is successful or not, that determines the answer you get. And that was the starting point that we said, it is not that easy to get a set of successful projects and to define what contributes to the success if you don't take these different viewpoints into account. So we have some topics to discuss, but I felt that with a topic that is so influenced by the different actors and the different perspectives that they bring, that on the panel I would like to have not only members of my working group, but also people with an outside perspective. So with me today is Antonia Cornau. She is an urban planner with over 20 years of experience in London and New York. She currently works for Emberg Engineering in Switzerland. And she might also be known to all of you as she is the Vice Chair for ITACUS, the ITA Committee on Underground Space. Next to her is Andy Thompson. He's the Program Executive for East Side Access, a project that was highlighted already in the opening session yesterday. He's working with Hatch, no, not Hatch anymore, Mott MacDonald, since 1988, stretch the Hatch, and has worked on a large number of underground projects in his career. Then I've invited Shani Wallace, known to many of us, and she's been working in the industry for over 30 years as a specialized trade press reporter, and she's the current owner of Tunnel Talk, and she visits more or less all the projects worldwide on a professional basis. And then at the far end, we have Damien McGurr, working with Donaldson Associates in the UK, where he leads the tunneling division. He is a former president of the BTS, the British Tunnelling Society, but maybe more important, he is involved with the newly formed Think Deep UK initiative, combining different perspectives on underground space in the UK, and most important of all, he is my vice animateur. So that's the panel discussing with you today. I'll move to the table. So I would like to start the audience, if someone wants to make a comment right away on how do we identify the key factors for success and how do we ensure that these key factors are considered from start to end in a project.
I would like to make a comment, because in urban underground space construction, I think public outreach is very important. Because to get to underground, you have to sink a shaft somewhere. Probably you're going to sink it in somebody's backyard, or you're going to take some of their parking lots, and you're going to have noise, dust, vibration, and you name it. So I think, to be successful also, you guys need to consider public outreach as a big component on underground construction in urban areas.
I totally agree, and I would say, Antonia, you might go into this. Yes?
Yes, absolutely, I agree. I mean, this is the key to inform the public and even have them participate in the project early on, so they can also shape it. But we have seen that where we communicate the project's scope early on, the acceptance factors are much higher with the public. I will quickly demonstrate on the basis of a few quick slides example of why I think some projects are not successful, because we might be using the wrong cost-benefit analysis models, and because we might not be taking our stakeholders into account early on. So a lot of underground space projects...
on the screen, please.
A lot of underground space projects fail to reach the next planning stage because of the monetary appraised methods we use and the decision makers use. So how do we get these projects from the early planning phase to an approved stage? How do we manage that we don't just take capital cost into consideration? How do we appraise the benefits, the social benefits that these underground space projects surely have for our cities? Creating a suitable cost-benefit analysis framework that takes the benefits and costs into account. I have an example of the Madrid M30 motorway. It used to look like this, as you see it on the left side, a large roadway dissecting the center of Madrid, barring people from the waterfront, pollution a problem, and it was tunneled for a large section of it, and a huge parkland was created in the city of Madrid. The leadership of the Madrid mayor was a key success factor. The project reunited divided city areas, it led to noise and emissions reduction, and it provided the city with 1 million square meters of green space. Now, not using that 1 million square meters for other purpose was a political decision. How do we value that decision? How do we value a decision that has a city looking like this? to a city looking like this. Value. How do we define it? And value creation. Is it something that we're building that others want and that others want to invest in? I have many benefits to show you, which I can't go into detail on, but we know about the positive effects of urban parks and green spaces in cities, in health benefits, in environmental benefits, and in social benefits. And I would challenge you to think about and also give us your experiences about cost-benefit models. Have yours worked in your kind of projects to make them a success? Have you been able to find champions early on in the project phase? Have you worked with the right stakeholders and investors? Have you communicated your successful projects to the public and to political decision makers? And have we taken into account the role of urban planning in making those projects successful? This is really what we're doing at ITACUS, at the ITA Committee on Underground Space Use. We want to create a dialogue early on. We don't just want engineer projects in isolation. We want to reach out to the public, to architects, to designers, and to decision makers to make them a success early on.
That was very good. I go along with 200%, not just 100%. But I think there's one key issue that was missing from Bruce, from the previous question. This is how can we best get a way forward? And there's one interesting feedback that I made in my own personal life experience. There's one thing that's completely missing in all our meetings is children. If you get children on your side, you'll have them with you for life. My grandfather was in mining, my father was in mining, and I finished up in tunnelling. But what I noticed in the environmental issues, children are taught at school about the environment, but most of them never get a chance to see what's underground. And I actually was called in on that Hague project, and I came in when they were stuck, and they asked me what we should do. So I can actually relate to that particular project. But what the most important thing I think is we should be having films, documentaries for children, because they're not allowed to go underground. They can't actually see it. And I've had many people to me said, what do you do? And I say, tunneling. And they say, what's tunneling? You know, I say, underground. We should be making a film for children, and we should be inviting at the future conferences school children from the local city to come and listen to us and actually present that and actually compete for it, just like they did with the space agency. You know, when they sent somebody out to space, the kids from a school up in the middle of the UK were actually invited to cooperate. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice point. I think this is a very good idea.
Great. Just 2 points that I'd like to bring up. Once, I have a website called celery.org. Celery like the crunchy food you eat. And it's a website for kids to write their own books about engineering projects. And they can upload them and download them for free. So I think this kind of thing fits with what Martin just said about creating an opportunity for kids to learn and tell their own stories about what they saw when they went in the tunnel and why they think it's a good idea. So I volunteer that site for your use. The second thing is, and I've already sort of told most of the working group this, but I think that you cannot do a cost-benefit study on underground space unless you have a value for the underground space itself. And while we have a value for surface area, acreage, and we know about air rights, we have a market for that, we do not have a market value for underground space. And until we have an explicit market value, we can't do cost-benefit trade-offs, and we can't protect the underground from loss of opportunity now or in the future. So,
I think that you make a very clear point but it's not only the cost of the space itself, but we need to have a model to price all the benefits that these projects bring us as well. Any comments?
I'd like to put a question about the unbalance in time, because quite often the costs involved are on a different time than the benefits that come later. And also the difference between personal disadvantages that people may have to cope with living in a city for a certain period, and other people later on having the benefits. How do you take this unbalance into consideration? I'd like to hear your comment.
Anyone?
Go ahead. I agree, that's the challenge we're facing. I don't have the perfect answer for that. That's something we're working on in the working group, and we value your input here. We're always looking at the capital cost and the duration of the construction project, and we're building something for the future with a lot of direct and indirect benefits lasting way into the future. So how do we capture those values, and indeed how do we assess them? New social cost benefit analysis models have been developed. They have been, for instance, applied in the city of Athens in a recent metro development, where the cost analysis first indicated the project was viable, then a social cost benefit analysis was applied, and it was actually presented in a recent WTC 2 years ago, where the project was deemed viable and the city said, yes, let's do it, go ahead. Other options, I'd say, involve private investment, where there's always a different angle on going about such an investment.
I've got a comment on that perspective. We know that major undertakings take time to plan, to implement. Once the digging begins, it's a long wavelength of activity. I had the chance to present to Governor Cuomo once on a large-scale project, and in the middle of the presentation, he stopped me and said, God bless you guys for having big ideas. Nobody has big ideas anymore. And I think we have to invert the logic that says, let's not worry about the details, let's talk about the vision. Anybody who heard Peter Hirschberg yesterday talk about the vision and how we capture value added in implementing large programs, it's evolutionary, it's revitalizing. And yes, it takes time, but are we not going to attempt to do these things just because it's a long wavelength? I think we have to challenge the minds of the planners and the people and the governments to say you need to get on board with these types of activities, because they are transformational agendas.
So Eric Eberhardt from the University of British Columbia. I have a question for Shani to tap into her journalistic experience, because what we see is the real gap in terms of communicating value is getting the message to the public. We create websites, we have projects, we have the Canada line for the 2010 Winter Olympic, a project that was on time, reasonably on budget. Ridership is exceeded all projections. A success, the public sees it as a failure because of the relationship they had with the merchants and the how they handled the public press. The Evergreen line, which is our transit project going on now. The news media, well, they want to report our sinkholes. We have a new tunneling project, the Broadway Corridor. The mayor's office is trying to push us. They want to do it. Public backlash, because all the public has ever seen is all the negative news stories that follows any project, because the positive sides never get communicated. Peter Hirschberg, he inspires. We have in Vancouver, we had Larry Beasley. They put together these talks that do, really get people motivated in terms of how underground space can be used. But the public are passive. They don't go to these websites. They don't see it. All they see is the news media. News media is not interested. Well, they'll report the positives, but for every positive story, there's probably 5 or 10 negative stories. So it's really, how do we get the news media, how do we get the value communicated to the public when the public are passive, they're not actively searching these sources that do communicate the value.
It's a very difficult question to contemplate, really. The relationship between the media and any of the industries that are building our cities and running them, and it's a love-hate relationship. For the technical trade press, we're already on side. Obviously, we have to report the facts that as they are on any project, and we have to report the sinkholes too. But we are more measured or more balanced in the way that we are going to address it, because we're part of the industry as well. But for the general public, the engineers are to say ill-equipped isn't right, but not experienced enough in being able to put across the positive message themselves. Communicating is a difficult exercise. The politicians are very good at it, educators are good at it, but engineers are actually not. And I've been at town hall meetings where they're arguing about, I don't want this tunnel to come anywhere near my house because my house is going to fall down a hole. And the engineers are like deers in the headlights because they're going, well, maybe it will. So we need to be able to harness good public relation companies to get our message out there in a way that allows the general media to understand better what we do. We're underground, we're out of sight, we're out of mind until something goes wrong. When it's all going well, there aren't enough open days for the media, there aren't enough... The engineering community itself tends to think, as you say, that the media, all they want to do is bash us. But actually, that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't have that attitude. We should actually get them on side, bring them in, influence them, educate them. They're looking at bridges and they're looking at high-rise buildings and they're influenced by what they see. For us, they don't see it. And all they ever get to see is the mess on the street or the noise or the shaft that's going down or the trucks that are trundling through the city with muck or the sinkhole.
So on the mining side, on the energy side, those projects, we will talk a lot about social license. And that's a big part of the project is the community engagement and how to get them involved in the projects, not just communicating the value of getting them involved. But in our urban projects, we don't really have that discussion. We do have open forums and stuff like that, but it's this passive relationship, and we're not approaching the public from their perspective. What are they worried about? Because to me, it's when we have the government on side and the city planners on side, and everyone wants to do this, the roadblocks are the public. Because the public, in their memory, is what went wrong last time, and certain issues that they don't like in their communities. Urban densification. Everyone is afraid to have a subway stop near their home because they like their quiet neighborhood, and as soon as they know that they get one, it's going to be a densification hub, and they're trying to resist that. And so they're not seeing the value, all they see is that negative side. But each stakeholder has their different perception of value, and that's how do you get that more broad, encompassing message out to the different individual interests. What is the value for them?
I think connecting up all of the areas, the suburbs, the areas of an urban development, the only way to do it is with the public infrastructure. More roads and the community that's at the end of the line are always going to think, well, we're going to suffer now because everybody's going to be coming into our community to then commute into the cities. But they have to understand too that in time there'll be another community beyond them, and they'll become part of a much bigger city, and that their preserve is not forever reserved.
Can I just add, I'm probably one of the engineers that Jenny talks about that can't sell these things, but just to pick up a few things, and it probably goes back to owners again, and I think the lady who represented owners in the previous talk again was about sharing knowledge and stuff, and I think there's probably good examples as well, Shani, where we've had projects that have actually sold it well, and possibly could say Crossrail in London has, in terms of their PR and their marketing and stuff, to the public and through the newspaper and the press and Twitter and all that, have done a tremendous job in terms of selling that and making that the public want that job and want to know it. So I think it's incumbent upon us to work with owners to do that, because as engineers maybe we can't do it as well. But it's also taking up Martin's point earlier about education as well. It's also going back and working with owners and building that in early, so we do get the young people into the science, technology, engineering, math early. We do take them as far underground as we can within the limits of the project, and build that in early into all of these projects, so that the youth are then seeing what is below their feet and can take that forward into the next generation.
It's true. Crossrail has done a very good job at engaging with the public, but they did engage a professional public relations team who are not the engineers, and so the message is coming out not from the engineering community, but from professional public relations experts. The open days are also really important. If you ever get to hear someone say, I was on the open day for the Hindhead Tunnel or something, where just before it was open to traffic, there was a weekend where everybody could walk through the tunnel, not a very long one, and so it was quite possible to do it. And they remember it to this day. Driving through it is one thing, but having walked through it, that was an experience to remember.
Yeah, and I think that Andy can add something to this as well, given that east side access, although it's the kind of project that would not be possible at surface in these days anymore, adds quite a lot of value by being underground to the community as well.
Yeah, so you know, talking about working in the ultimate urban environment, building the east side access project in the middle of Manhattan has certainly been challenging. And MTA Capital and MTA, the owner, certainly had to address a lot of the issues that have been discussed, especially the public outreach. They didn't actually use a professional firm because MTA, as it's a 35,000 person agency, already has its own media and PR department. But they've struggled. And you know, one of the things you go back to an owner like MTA is they kind of almost have an attitude, well, whatever we do, somebody in Manhattan is not going to like, so I'm still going to do it. Because you may inconvenience some people on 2nd Avenue on the 7 line extension when you're rebuilding the Fulton Transit Street facility. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're improving the overall public transportation in a city like Manhattan. And people understand there has to be, you know, to use a very time-worn phrase, you have to break eggs to make an omelette, whatever. So somebody is always going to be inconvenienced. Somebody is always going to have dust. Somebody's always going to have noise. That's part of the living in Manhattan. So I'm just going to quickly, for those of you who don't know what East Side Access is, and going back to Wout's earlier slide on what defines a successful project, by pretty much any standards, East Side Access is a totally unsuccessful project. It was supposed to be in operation in 2012. It will not go into revenue service until 2022. It was originally supposed to cost $4.6 billion. It's going to cost $10.4 billion. And there's a lot of reasons why. And this is despite the overall scope of the project hasn't actually changed. So you've got all that schedule and cost creep, mostly because, and there's a couple of reasons. One of the big reasons is the financing of the project. MTA works on a 5-year capital plan, and so once the money runs out, you can't award any contracts. So for a while, we had to wait 2 years to award one of the latest contracts, which kind of hurts your schedule a little bit. Because we just didn't have the money. And the way that MTA, going back to the previous session, on contracts, MTA can't award a contract unless it has 100% of the funds. So it has to have the money, it has to put the money into a savings account, into its, and then it can award the contract. If you don't have the money, you don't award the contract. So that meant that we had to make a lot of choices as to what was the critical path and what actually had to keep going to keep the project moving. And when you consider it's now, what is it? It's 2016. The 2015 to 2020 capital plan for MTA has not yet been approved, which means that basically in July this year, the project, the MTA, runs out of money. So it's it's a real challenge to keep a major project moving. Eastside Access overall will have had 35 separate third-party contracts when it's complete. And like I said, the last major heavy civil contract was just awarded, Tudor Perini, about a week ago, to actually build out the cabins. So what are the benefits of Eastside Access? It keeps us employed. That's good. It's a lot of tunnelling work. It's been very good for Local 147, the Sandhogs. But if you look at what it does for the city, you're going to give 160,000 people a day a one-seat ride onto the east side of Manhattan. For those of you who know Manhattan, there's only 2 railroad stations in Manhattan. Penn Station, which is a mess, and Grand Central Terminal, which provides service to the north. Penn Station is shared by 3 separate railroads. Amtrak owns it, and anybody who works with Amtrak know that means it's in an excellent state of maintenance. Long Island Railroad and New Jersey Transit use it. So the subways are also overcrowded. So if you live on Long Island, you have to go all the way to the west side of Manhattan, get onto a very crowded subway system, and go back to the east side of Manhattan. Now, why is that important? Well, actually, that's where most of the jobs are. So if I just... This is the density of jobs in Manhattan. And you can see there that the most jobs are around Grand Central Terminal. But if you live on Long Island Railroad, you have to go to Penn Station, get a subway, or walk. It's not convenient. So the East Side Access, basically, there it is. It comes away from Long Island. We go underneath the existing 100-year-old Grand Central Terminal. Of course, it all has to be underground because there is no space on the surface in Manhattan. The project started in the 1960s. The section that goes under the East River there was actually built in the 1960s, 1970s. Then the city went bankrupt. The original plan, coming back to where its first point, was to actually come up to the surface. It was actually to use the lower level of Grand Central Terminal. That got ditched when they realized how much underpinning you have to do to all that very expensive property down Park Avenue. So we went to an underground solution, all underground. Benefits. So how do you harness those benefits? Well, all the property developers around Grand Central Terminal now want to have an entrance into the new concourse. So they're actually paying money to do that. We're saying, fine, you can have that access. That's going to increase their rent. That's going to increase the tax revenues to the city. That doesn't come back to MTA. So you can't put that into your cost-benefit analysis because MTA is doing one, New York City is doing a separate one. The reverse commute going out of Manhattan to Long Island is also increased a lot now. House prices on Long Island are going to increase because of this project. They believe there's going to be something like an 11 to 12% price increase in property on Long Island Railroad. However, that's going to benefit individuals. It's not going to benefit the city. It doesn't benefit MTA. How do you harness that? I'm not sure how you can harness those kind of benefits. So here were some of the constraints we had to deal with. So we had a really nice environmental impact statement that said you have to build this entire project in the middle of Manhattan with no truck traffic. So we ended up having to basically stage, so we're building in Manhattan, we're staging in the Bronx and Queens, and everything comes in by rail or through the tunnels. So we can't, and there's no access at the south end of the job. That's really impacted staging, it's impacted the packaging, because everything has to come from Queens to Manhattan through the tunnels that you've just built. So you can't get ahead of yourself. It's just some of the constraints. So, for example, blasting, stakeholder expectations. Let's just talk about that. This actually is a change house for the miners. And we're talking about community outreach. Musa mentioned earlier about dealing with the locals. We actually dressed up this. This is the Morgan Libraries on the right-hand side. That's quite a historic building in Manhattan. We ended up having to pay to put planters in. And on the other side of these trailers, we actually printed. The Morgan Library gave us some graphics, and we put it on the outside of these trailers so they could pretend they weren't there. But this is what you got to do. This is money that MTA spent to keep people happy. Did it work? No, to some degree, because people were still unhappy that now the sidewalk's been restricted. you can't win. So, like I say, by most. However, when it's open, I can tell you this right now, living in New York, the day after East Side Access opens, it's going to have been there forever, and nobody who rides it will remember that it cost $10 billion instead of $4 and took 10 years longer to build. Because as soon as it's open, there'll be another construction project which is pissing everybody else off in the city, and good to go.
Okay. Comment?
I would come back to the previous question that was addressed to Shani and to Damien. And I think they are doing a great job, but it's a one-way information channel because they are the providers and addressing to the consumer. But nowadays, we are living in an information age with two-way communication channels. So I suggest that we engineers do what politicians do, get in direct contact with the public. And I'm telling you from my personal experience. So for this, I have joined some dedicated forums, let's say, for people that are interested in metro development in Bucharest, what is happening there underground, because the curiosity is great, and our work is not seen. So I choose the nickname, saying like Subway Guru, to show that I'm a person that knows about these things, and coming each evening around 11 o'clock like that, and having almost 200 people to discuss with what was happening down with one or two pictures or a small movie explaining why from the engineer point of view and getting suggestions from the public. It's very efficient, believe me. It's time consuming, but I think this is the way to address directly from the engineer to the public in a simple language to be understood by everybody. This doesn't mean that the press doesn't have its own role, that the owner has to communicate what he intends to do, why, and so on. But we have to go to the basic, to direct communication.
Thank you. Musa, one final comment?
Yeah, I am an owner, so that's why when I started I talked about public outreach. Public outreach is going to make or break your project because we were working in a very dense area in Washington, D.C. So we were sinking shaft in people's basically backyard. So what we did is we have what we called, we have an Office of External Affairs. We did not hire an outside consultant. We have an Office of External Affairs, and we have an outreach team. And that outreach team works with the public there. We have what we call tunnel forums. We bring them in every month with the public. We discuss. We give them the schedule, what we're going to be doing. And when we're going to close the road, we're going to discuss it with them. When we sink a shaft, we're going to discuss it with them. If there is a noise, we offer to relocate them in another place if they want. If they're working home, we offer an office outside of the site. When we name a TBM, it's a contest within the neighborhood. We tell them, okay, we're naming the TBM, you guys going to come up with the name. They feel they are involved, they are part of the project. We offer them tunnel tours if we have our tunnel there, we offer them, we get them underground, they see what we are doing and how it's going to benefit them. We take a parking lot, we offer them an alternative parking area. If it's far enough, we have a shuttle, we take you there. So they are part of it. It's a public outreach. If they don't feel they are part of this, they're going to break the project. But if they feel they are part of it, and you offer something and they appreciate it, they're going to support the project.
I fully agree that to get the public involved and to get their agreement with the project, that giving them all the information about the state of the project is critical, even to the point that in Amsterdam, the tunnel boring is below ground and is invisible. We went as far as to have a large red arrow, 4 meters high, on the surface, indicating where the TBMs were at any moment. To inform the public, even though they don't see it,
and
where the works are going on.
Can I just add one thing to that? On East Side Access, just reiterating Musa's point, we currently we had 3 full-time people that we employed directly to deal with community outreach. We issued every week. We issued because we got an exception on our environmental impact statement, so we could actually bring concrete trucks into Manhattan. And we had fixed drop pipe locations, and we actually issued a weekly schedule to say which drop pipe was going to be used, what hours it was going to be used for. Every time we blasted underneath Grand Central Terminal, we issued a bulletin to say at 10:30 tonight there will be a blast, so that people knew. And of course, what that meant was that anybody who lived near the ventilation shaft at 10:45, they used to call up and complain that they could smell the blast and the dust. But we felt it was worth it. We needed to do that to keep the public informed, and we also meet with the community. Every area in Manhattan has a community board, and we meet with those guys because they have, they're lawyers. They are opinion makers in Manhattan. And when you meet with the community board on Park Avenue, and you're told, you really can't do that work here because Jennifer Aniston lives in this building. Now that was great because the sand hose just used to wait outside to see if they could see her. But, this is the kind of thing, in a city like Manhattan, Park Avenue, this is the kind of stuff you're dealing with all the time. And engaging with the community. Yes, I can say that you're always going to be pissing somebody off in Manhattan. You are. This just goes with the territory. But the more you can show that you have a warm, cuddly side as well, the more successful you're going to be. We, on East Side Access and MTA adopted it, we actually publish weekly. We have a Flickr feed. It's a bit old-fashioned now, I know. But we have a Flickr feed where we put out weekly progress photographs onto that feed. There are videos. There are updates. There are all that information. And does it make any difference? Hard to tell. But if you don't do it, I think it's the wrong move.
But I do agree with the owner of from Washington. Participatory planning is the answer, and even if it's more time-consuming, in the end it will deliver the better result. I also would like to invite you at this occasion to our Be Smart, Join Us, Think Deep session, taking place from 2 to 5:30 this afternoon in room 120, hosted by ITA.
Thank you for Wout and his panel, Working Group 20, as well as Working Group 3, Arnold Dix, and Working Group 2, Chung Sing Yu. So how about a round of applause for everyone? We very much appreciate your feedback. And that brings our morning session to a close. Thank you.